A statement of any individual appropriate accommodations that are necessary to measure the academic achievement and functional performance of the child on state and district-wide assessments. And if the IEP team determines that the child shall take an alternative assessment on a particular state or district-wide assessment of student achievement, a statement of why the child cannot participate in the regular assessment and the particular alternative assessment selected is appropriate for the child.
Whenever your school district administers statewide or district-wide assessments, there has to be special consideration given to the student who has an IEP or an individualized education program. And so you want to make sure that that student is not, well, for all intent and purposes, not being discriminated against, Jen. And so that the test is administered to them, or the assessment, in a way that meets their needs.
That's right. And so when the IEP is developed, the Individualized Education Program, one of the required federally mandated elements is a description of how, if at all, a child is going to receive accommodations in the assessment of a district-wide or statewide test, and why. Mm-hmm. And the reason for this is not just the discrimination piece you're talking about, but because we want parents and school districts to have access to that data as to how children are doing, including children who have disabilities, on district and statewide testing, particularly with regard to student achievement. And so what kind of accommodations might be necessary, and in some states might be permitted. In some states, they will not allow certain types of accommodations on certain types of tests. So an example being, a state may administer a test on reading, and for the reading portion of the test, you cannot have a person reading it to you because they are actually testing reading. But for the math portion of the test, you might have an accommodation for a student who has a reading disability that somebody could read to them because what they're testing is math. So there are restrictions based on your state and your district about how it can be accommodated. But the point is the IEP has to explain why the child requires accommodations and how they're going to occur.
And typical accommodations are things like extended time, perhaps an individualized space that's a more quiet and smaller environment than taking the test or assessment in a large classroom with lots and lots of kids. But there are several ways that a child can be accommodated. And so, but that's what we're talking about.
A practical tip is that I find that it's a useful tool for parents to be able to, as they're looking at their child's program, assess whether or not their child is in fact making academic progress by looking at how they perform on those district-wide assessments. And in my experience, Julie, I have seen school districts push parents towards more accommodations so that the results on the test look better than they would look if the child didn't get accommodations. And I would just tell parents to be somewhat cautious about which accommodations you agree to through that IEP meeting, because it is a good barometer of whether or not, in fact, if you're being told year after year your child is making grade level progress, and then the district-wide tests come back and you see that your child didn't meet goal, or your child compared to their school or to their state is much lower. It's another data point that can be very useful.
Right. And the other thing is that you may have a child who is not able to participate in the assessment, and that's where the federal regulation talks about an alternative. Right. And so for many children, that might be a checklist of sorts, where they're not able to participate in the test. And so you need to know, how is your child going to be accommodated for these statewide and district assessments?